Hello and welcome to Shattered Lives, Reach Ireland's crime podcast. I'm Paul Healy. I'm crime correspondent for the Irish Daily Star and the Irish Mirror, and I'm joined as ever by Michael O'Toole, our crime and defence editor. How's it going, Michael?
Grant Paul, how are you? You had a busy week. You were at two conferences.
Very busy, very, very busy. I don't recommend doing two conferences back to back. It's hard work, but it was very interesting couple of days at the Garda Representative Association conference and then into the Prison Officers Association conference. So down in Sligo and Westport for a full week. So I'm just recovering from that, shall we say.
You had a very interesting story, which I'd like to talk about first. Not connected to either of those conferences, thankfully. There were no crimes committed at those conferences, I believe. You had a story about the Kinahan Hutch feud, and I think this is quite significant, and I think we should talk through this a while. Fill us in on what you had.
Yeah, well, this is interesting, and I suppose it feeds into maybe a wider conversation we can have. But I was told about a football match that basically a junior soccer match that happened in April between Hardwick Football Club there and Galtee Celtic. So, Hardwick is an inner city club, and it is supported by people in the inner city, and that includes people who are affiliated with the Kinahan and Hutch sides. But I was fascinated to learn that the likes of Barry Finnegan, so he's a rapist and a key Kinahan cartel member, attended that football match. But also you had the likes of Patrick Hutch Jr. And Derek Delboy Hutch, his brother, also attended that same football match, and a number of other Hutch associates as well. And as well as Barry Finnegan, then on the Kinahan side of things, there were other individuals. Nathan Biggie Little, he was named in the High Court as being an associate of the Byrne Organised Crime Group, which we all know is a spin-off of the Kinahan cartel. So you've got, and also, sorry, Lee Gibson, another member of the Kinahan cartel. He's been photographed with Daniel Kinahan in the past and also named in the High Court as being a member of the cartel. So you're talking about people who have actually been publicly named as being affiliates of both sides and very high profile figures. I mean, Patrick Hutch Jr. Was probably the top target of the Kinahan cartel at one point. And that is because the Kinahans effectively blamed him for being playing a key role in the Regency Hotel murder of David Byrne. So to see those sides together in a football, attending a football game, and obviously, being aware of each other's company because you're talking about a small local football match. What does that tell us? That tells us that the feud, look, it's obviously not at the stage that it used to be.
And it's very significant because I think if this football match had happened after the Regency in February 2016, as we know, Patrick Hutch was charged over the Regency murder of David Byrne, but the case against him collapsed. And there was a nolle prosequi entered, so he's innocent man.
Yes.
But he was charged with that. So if that game had happened in 2016, 2017, or even 2018, I think neither side would have been at it, or if they had been at it, there would have been a serious capacity for violence.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you recall, and I'm sure you do, in covering the feud, I mean, we had sources telling us at the time that particularly the Kinahan side would have taken a pop at literally anyone that had any affiliation with, forget about the Hutch organized crime group for a moment, even the Hutch family. So anyone that was even an innocent member of the family became a target, and anyone even tangentially associated with them became a target. So to see these people now fraternizing in the same circles, I, I hesitate to ask the question, but it's a question we have to raise. Is the feud over?
Well, guards or investigators would always talk about, there's an evidence, but an absence of evidence can be just as telling as being physical evidence. So, for example, your mobile phone data. If there's no mobile phone data, that would indicate that your mobile phone data was turned off, and guards would say that points to various things that maybe people turn their phones off. So the rather bad analogy I'm trying to make, if there was an absence of tension and an absence of violence at that game, then that is an indicator, perhaps, that the tensions and the violence has reduced significantly, that they feel safe enough that these people can go to these games and maybe not fraternize, but be in the same very close proximity to each other. So that could be an indicator that the feud has reduced significantly. And we have to remember the last murder in the feud was in January 2018. So that's 6 years. So, maybe it's not over, but maybe it is moribund. I think the guards would say, look, they're preparing for the worst and hoping for the best. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, well, I mean, in conversations that you and I have had with senior sources, they have stressed, and indeed I said in my piece, that you can't really say the feud is over, and it really would only take one incident for tensions to boil right back up again. I mean, this was very, very personal. I mean, obviously, look, Gary Hutch was the murder that started it all, but that was very personal to Daniel Kinahan. Obviously, Daniel Kinahan believed that Gary Hutch was trying to kill him and effectively take over his criminal empire. So that was how it all started. But it got far more bitter than that. The death of David Byrne brought in a whole new element because the Byrne organized crime group, really took that very, very to heart, very seriously, and it became a bloodthirsty feud from that day on. And so just even to put into context the people that were at the football match, Lee Gibson and Nathan Little, okay, they're not high profile associates, but they would have been very close to the late David Byrne. So to be standing at the same football pitch as the likes of Patrick and Delboy Hutch, in particular Patrick Hutch, who the Kinahan cartel, yes, he is innocent in the eyes of the law, but the Kinahan cartel blamed him and pinpointed him as being the infamous man in drag at the Regency Hotel. So to see them standing in the same circle, that tells me that something has changed. What exactly? I don't know.
Do you know what I'm thinking? Do you remember the story John Mooney did in the Sunday Times a few weeks ago where he got all the data about Christopher Kinahan traveling around Europe and everything? And do you remember there was that one intriguing place where he went to dinner near where Gerry Hutch was living in Fuengirola before he was arrested and brought over to Ireland and later acquitted of the murder of David Byrne as well. So, I think John would be convinced that there was a meeting taking place there because who believes in coincidences? So maybe there was a meeting. We know that people on the Hutch side say that Gerry Hutch met Kinahans before the Regency trying to sort things out with Gary Hutch, who was subsequently murdered in September 2015. So, we always say this, there's plenty of things going on in the background, but would that not be an indicator that maybe there has been some sort of accommodation reached and that the feud is quiet for the last few years because maybe the Kinahans realize, look, there's far too much going on.
It's bad for business, is what we keep hearing from, I suppose, sources connected to the underworld, and I mean that makes logical sense. Of course, it does. I mean, and after 6, 7 years, they have to get back to business, and shooting people in the street certainly gets in the way of that. And Gardaí, that's down to the Garda effort. The Garda crackdown was immense. The amount of Kinahan associates that were jailed was incredible. And then you also have the Kinahans in Dubai on the back foot. Okay, you might say that they're now living their lives, untouched. But I would say that the pressure that they were put under halted the feud, certainly halted it in the last number of years. There hasn't been a murder in Kinahan Hutch feud since 2018. There's a couple of other signs that we've already discussed in this podcast that the feud has dissipated. Probably the big one, which was your story, was the 24-hour survey, the 24-hour guarded post that was outside the home of Patsy Hutch on Champions Avenue. That was removed only late last year. Again, an indicator that the Garda intel is, we don't need that post there anymore.
I thought that was significant because guards will always be very cautious because can you imagine if the guards decided, right, we're going to take that post or community reassurance beat, I think they called it, off the area where Mr. Hutch lives, because it wasn't only for him, it was to protect the community. Can you imagine if they took that off and the next day the Kinahans tried to whack him? So
Mm.
they're always very cautious. So that was a big indicator for me that now, however, but when we did that story, I was very much guided. This is purely about the threat that Patsy Hutch. The guards would still believe that there are other people who are at risk, but they were very specific that it was about. They believe the threat to Patsy Hutch has diminished
Mm.
so much to allow that community reassurance to be removed. So that I think you're right, Paul. I think that is significant. So there is a jigsaw that we can look at and maybe have a helicopter view and go, right, when you put A and B together and C and D and E, there is a very strong indicator that the feud is either dying or dead.
Yeah, and I mean the other major indicator are the actions of Jerry the Monk Hutch, who many of us thought would leave the country and never return. He has stayed here. He predominantly resides here. I know that he has a base in Lanzarote that he frequents for a number of weeks, even months at a time, and he has been back there a number of times since his acquittal last year. But he's predominantly still in the North Dublin area and has even been seen walking around the inner city. So what does that tell you? I mean, he's comfortable enough to walk around the north inner city of Dublin now.
Let's go back to 2016 after the Regency when we all know that the Kinahan gang were desperate to murder Jerry Hutch.
Mm.
And he was fleeing for his life and he was effectively hiding. The guards were after him. We know the guards were after him and he was later charged and acquitted. That's grand. But the Kinahans were after him as well. So he was extremely worried for his security and he vanished. But now people see him and people see him walking about. So, and that's another indicator. But when we talk about the legacy of the feud, two things. I think you're right. Guards do believe it could flare up at any time. So it's sort of like a watch and brief. So we could be talking this time next week and something may have happened. But as it is, they're very confident that it's nice and calm. But that feud, up to 18 men were murdered. There were countless hits planned and foiled by the Gardaí. I think I interviewed John O'Driscoll, former assistant commissioner in charge of serious and organised crime at the height of it. He said they foiled 70 hits since the Regency, and the vast majority of them were connected to the feud, and the vast majority were of the Kinahan gang trying to murder people associated with the Hutch family, not even the Hutch organised crime gang, as you said, with the Hutch family. So it had a massive effect. I just wonder what the legacy of this will be. And what I'm getting at, I remember a senior guard talking to me about this is going to be intergenerational. There will be people who have suffered and have been targeted as a result of this, and their siblings and associates will be there in 10 or 20 years' time. Do you know what I mean? In other words, could there be consequences for this feud in the next generation?
And that's a good question. I remember a story about how the feud was playing out even in playgrounds, you know?
Exactly. And it's personal, Paul, because it's
Yeah.
not people from the south side going across the river to attack people in the north side. It's people in the north inner city betraying other people in the north inner city. Sometimes not people living in the same neighborhood turning on members of the Hutch family. So surely that's a breeding ground for resentment and conflict in the future.
Yeah, and I mean, we've already seen some signs that maybe there are still grudges there, and if an opportunity came to take a pop at somebody, it could still happen. I've seen a story. I mean, you had the story about Trevor Byrne, a Kinahan cartel associate, who was hospitalized there last week, and understand that some unusual phone calls were then made to the hospital, someone trying to ask for his exact whereabouts in the hospital. So that flared a bit of a security alert, suggesting that someone at least has it out for Trevor Byrne.
And remember, I know the murder of Gary Hutch started this feud, but really it started before that when Gary Hutch in August 2014 tried to murder Daniel Kinahan. So, and Daniel Kinahan and Gary Hutch were the best of buddies. So it's like, and remember, members of the Hutch organized crime gang were part of the Kinahan crime gang. We know that they worked together. They know that some of them were part of the same outfit, and they hived off and they broke up. And it's a very, very bitter divorce and a very messy divorce. So it's personal.
Mm-hmm. And are you saying effectively what I think you're saying, which is, I mean, this feud could breed another feud, and another personal dispute that isn't has nothing to do with really the original dispute between Kinahan and Gary Hutch, for example.
I'm saying it's personal. I'm saying
Mm,
that there are personal enmities involved. I'm saying that
mm,
there are familial relationships. And I'm saying
hmm
who knows where it could end up 5, 10, or 15 years' time. Somebody could go, that fucker there, I know what he did to X and I'm going to get him.
hmm hmm
And who knows where it could spiral. It could spiral because this feud spiraled and that could spiral again. Hopefully I'm wrong, but I'm just
Hopefully
saying
not.
guards would have a concern
Mm,
that there could be lasting consequences for this.
And that's why I think we probably, just in answering that question, is the feud over? I don't think you could ever definitively say yes, but we're definitely at a different place from where we were in 2016.
Thank God, because it was terrible and it was no
Mm,
way for the North Inner City community to live. It was,
mm,
it reminded me of growing up in Belfast, Armed Support Unit, ERU unit, Emergency
mm,
Response Unit officers with Heckler and Koch MP7s and stuff on the
mm.
streets. Nobody wants to see that.
No. And just another subject we want to discuss on this topic. There are now people associated with the Kinahan cartel who are effectively renouncing their membership and want nothing to do with it, or at least publicly are saying, "Hey, I've got nothing to do with this, man." I've seen it already with notorious criminal Alan Wilson, but
Mm-hmm.
Declan Brady, aka Mr. Nobody, he was involved along with another individual uh, in relation to that murder in tracking a device that was placed on Noel Kerwin's car. And Noel Kerwin, as people may recall, was brutally murdered outside his home, sitting in his car, and only murdered again. And this ties into what we were talking
Mm-hmm.
about. Only really murdered because of some sort of tangential association with Jerry Hutch. So that was the state of the feud at that point in time. But what's fascinating about Declan Brady now, we've heard from his defense, where he is arguing for a more lenient sentence because he's pleaded guilty in relation to his involvement in this murder, but he's also renouncing his membership of he wants nothing to do with the Kinahan cartel. And evidence was given on his behalf that he has separated himself in the prison from other Kinahan affiliated associates and that he's doing well in prison and he's well behaved.
And that he's
So I
going
wonder, yeah.
when he gets out of prison, he's going to go and work on a building site that a relative owns a building company. What
Mhm,
is significant about Declan Brady, Mr. Nobody, is that Declan Brady was no ordinary member of the cartel. He was described to me as the chief executive, effectively, of the drugs section of the Kinahan cartel. Obviously, there was the murder section of the cartel, but this fellow was up to his bollocks in this. Basically, he was running the organization. And remember, the murder of David Byrne, the funeral of David Byrne a week or so later, that was when Mr. Nobody, Declan Brady, was spotted because guards were going, who's that fella? Because he was really central. He was one of the ones who was dressed up wearing the blue suits. And it was only really then, I think there'd been a bit of an investigation. He'd come to attention slightly before that, but it was really there that it crystallized everything for the guards. And he was caught in January 2017 in Rathcoole with the Kinahan arsenal, more than a dozen weapons. So he was central to the Kinahan operation. Now he's washing his hands off of the Kinahan cartel. And that's extremely significant. Maybe he has seen the light in prison. There are
Well,
more than 70 people in prison. How many lives have been ruined? How many lives have been lost for this feud? And how many lives have been ruined because of this feud?
And maybe that's why, publicly he wants to say, look, I've got nothing to do with this, and effectively saying that he really isn't a criminal figure. He's just a businessman who got caught up with the wrong crowd. I see Mr. O'Higgins said that he had a very, very significant change of heart, a change of emphasis, and a change of attitude to the commission of offences. He harbors a concern. So there was a concern about him possibly getting on the stand and actually just saying this
Mm.
himself. And the court heard that he harbors a concern that if he were to actually give that evidence, he might be the subject of recriminations and his personal safety and that of those close to him might be compromised. Now, I find that a bit odd because ultimately he still has someone saying in his defense, I've got nothing to do with the Kinahan cartel. So I wonder, Are there possible recriminations for that? Is he possibly
I,
putting himself in danger?
I understand that. I have to say I understand that, because just in relation to another case, there were these. Um, I can't really say it, but there's someone who was going to give evidence against somebody else. And he made a statement to the guards, but he wouldn't give evidence because he was worried about being called a rat in prison. Prison is a different way of life. And I'm sorry, but I completely understand Brady's view there, because he could get sliced in prison. He could get attacked in prison for taking his stand.
Oh, I know, but he still has. Oh, so there's a difference in taking the stand, then obviously, but he
There must be.
still has someone saying on his behalf, "I want nothing to do with the Kinahans," and
Mm-hmm.
he's not the only one, as I said. Alan Wilson, who was involved in a hit plot himself for the
Mm-hmm.
Kinahans, has said now he wants nothing to do with them. Interesting, very interesting.
Very, very interesting. Another interesting character, not connected to the Kinahans, but connected to organised crime, and really one of the everlasting, the totemic figures in organised crime in Ireland, is Tony Felloni. And he died last Monday. I got a wee sniff about him dying.
Mhm.
And it's, again, there's that whole, it took me 3 or 4 hours to get it confirmed, but we got there in the end. It's always amazing how you get to hear things. People don't realize, you get to hear things, and then you can't just go, oh, I'm told Tony Felloni's died, I'm going to tweet it or put it up on the
Mhm.
Mirror online. I think it took me 4 hours to get the confirmation, and we did. But uh, he died in the Matter on last Monday, and I've spoken about this before, Paul. I don't know, but I do not like nicknames. I understand why we have to use nicknames. We have to use nicknames principally because we can't identify people, and you have to use a nickname, really, because you can't keep on saying this man who is a criminal in North Dublin who has been involved in 45 murders, but we can't name him. So you take a name for him. But Tony Felloni's nickname was King Scum. And Paul Reynolds did a book about King Scum maybe 20 years ago. And having read that, I understand why it was called King Scum. But after he died, I was adverted to the fact that John O'Driscoll, the aforementioned John O'Driscoll, was a sergeant in the Store Street Drugs Unit in the 90s, and it was the guard, along with 3 other people who I'm going to name, because they were ordinary, what they would call mules, and they've now risen up to exalted ranks. Shimi Boland, who's the Detective Chief Superintendent in charge of the Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau, Angela Willis, who's the Assistant Commissioner for the DMR in Dublin, and Paul Cleary. Paul Cleary is the Assistant Commissioner for the Eastern region, so from Wicklow all the way down to wherever, Wexford. They were all part of the Store Street Drugs Unit that nailed Felloni. So somebody
Wow.
said to me, "You should talk to John O'Driscoll. He'll give you a quote." So I did. Now, John O'Driscoll, you've spoken to him. He's always been
Mhm.
a very measured and very thoughtful man. So I was talking to him, and he said he would talk to me. We ran it in the Sunday Mirror at the weekend. It's up online, actually, if what people want to read it. Right. What's really interesting, I asked him about Felloni, and he said he was an evil man. And it was like,
Mhm.
fuck me, because
Mhm.
I did not expect John O'Driscoll to say that. I
Mhm.
was expecting to say, well, and he did say it later, well, he was a victim of society, because John is a very measured, very thoughtful person, and I just
Mhm.
said, he was an evil man. I said, fucking hell. So
Mhm.
he ruined so many countless lives in Dublin. He helped flood North Inner City Dublin with drugs, but he also, I mean, I know he turned most of his family members onto drugs. He gave his own family heroin. He gave one of his kids heroin on his 16th birthday to give him a taste of it, and
Jesus.
and you hear all these other stories about things he did and suspicions and stuff, and he was heartless. And just
Mm.
reading that book about Paul Reynolds' book, I always remembered this. He Vulnerable young ladies and young girls would, in the 50s, in the 60s, would come up to Dublin, and he would get to know them, and he would effectively get them to strip naked, and he would photograph them, and he would blackmail them into working as sex workers.
Wow.
Or he would take the photographs and say, if you don't send me these photographs, or if you don't send me money, if you don't give me money, I'm going to send these photographs to your parents. So he used the young girl, met them at the GPO, and he would ensnare young ladies and young girls to work as sex workers. So he became a violent, real, whether it's assault women, sex pimp, So he was, scum is a very strong word, but I can understand why Tony Felloni was called King Scum. And the effects of what he did have been multi-generational as well, because
He
he
spent.
destroyed his own family.
Did he spend 20 years in prison? He got a pretty lengthy sentence.
He got a 20-year prison sentence, and that's
Mm,
one of the things John O'Driscoll, it was his operation, Operation Pizza. John O'Driscoll nailed him. Michael O'Sullivan and Noreen O'Sullivan in the then Garda National Drugs Unit were after him, but it was John O'Driscoll, Paul Cleary, Angela Willis, and Shimi Boland who nailed him. And it was one of the biggest sentences of its time. It was 1996, 97. He got 20 years, but he did 14. So he got out in 2011. Now, here's the other interesting thing about Felloni. I asked John, did crime pay? And he goes, no, no, no. We took everything off him. The Criminal Assets Bureau went after him, and he came out. He was in his late 60s, I think. So John said it was over for him then. So he died in penury. He ruined his life. He ruined everybody else's life.
The Criminal Assets Bureau took $500,000 off him, which I think at the time would even more than it would be worth now. Yeah,
big whack. Yeah, but he was damaged because look, everybody has to bear responsibility for their own actions. But John did say he was in an industrial school, Dangan in County Offaly, infamous. So God knows what horrors were perpetrated on him in those industrial schools. But there were plenty of people who were brutalized in those schools and didn't go on and ruin other people's lives. So they were choices Felloni made. But I was just really struck by John O'Driscoll, most thoughtful guard I've ever come across, going, he was an evil man. Just the way he said it, you know what I mean? It just really struck me. I thought it was very, very strong.
When you think about the scourge of heroin in our city centre, I mean, he's probably one of those figures that is centrally responsible for that. I mean, I know we talk about the Duns, but I mean, and that infamous quote from Christy Bronco Dunn, you should see who's coming after us. He was one of those who kind of came after them. And he proved that theory, I suppose, didn't he?
He didn't care about people. He prostituted young women. He gave drugs to his own family. And one of the things that John O'Driscoll said, he said, look, there were an awful lot of children who were in Dublin who were reared by their grandparents because they died from taking drugs that Felloni gave them. And that's very powerful. Wow. So he ruined lives. But he's met his maker now.
He has, and I thought it was fitting that I think only less than 20 people showed up at his funeral. It shows you how he was reviled, even among those who probably knew him best. And they played the Godfather theme, I read, when the coffin was being brought out of the church. So,
I told one relative of his about his death, and they were happy.
Really? Wow.
So
what does that tell you about him?
What does that tell you?
Well, if you've ever met someone that was more fitting of their nickname, I suppose that's him.
That's my point. He was hated. And even, I mean, that's the whole thing about Cleary and Willis and Boland and O'Driscoll. They did this sort of template for community linking up in investigations, because there were marches and stuff. People used to go follow Felloni with a loud hailer along O'Connell Street going, you're a cheating dirt and scumbag, right? So the guards worked with the community, and that was a template which they have used countless before, but that was really of his day. That was a seismic operation. Let's talk about threats.
Yes, well, unfortunately, this is a topic I think we're going to be talking about more and more with politicians and people in power becoming genuinely threatened. And I mean, look, it's true that politicians get abuse and get heckled every day of the week, but it's another thing entirely when someone makes a phone call saying a bomb has been planted at the Minister for Justice's home. Whether that ultimately turns out to be the truth or not, there's a certain security protocol that has to be followed. And that means that whoever's in the house at the time has to be evacuated from, be it in the middle of the night, which these last occasions have been, out of their home. The Minister for Justice, Helen McEntee, has young children and a partner. And last Wednesday, two threatening phone calls were made to the Samaritans helpline, claiming that there was a bomb at the minister's home, and her husband and her children had to be removed from the home, as I said, and the special detective unit are involved. And obviously, there was a search done. There were no bombs found. But can you imagine how terrifying that is for her family, for her young family? And this happened twice, and then it happened again there on Saturday. So three times within the space of a week, those threats have been made against the minister. Now, the minister is under a lot of political pressure at the moment. She's getting an awful lot of heckling and abuse online on social media, but it's another thing entirely for something like this to happen. And my sympathies go out to her and her family, really. But off the back of that, look, it's I suppose if you're covering something like this, your red flag goes up immediately because this isn't the first time this has happened. And so we've spoken about it on this podcast. We've covered the case of Michael Murray, who is a notorious rapist. He's serving a very, very lengthy number of sentences in prison, in the Midlands prison, and he was recently given 2 years extra for a threat against the minister.
And you mentioned something there. The latest threats were made to the Samaritans.
Yes.
Where did Michael Murray make his threats to?
So Michael Murray also phoned the Samaritans from his cell. So the prisoners actually have a phone. It's something maybe people don't realize, but they have a phone and a certain number of phone numbers that they're allowed to call, and they can call the Samaritans helpline. And the Samaritans are rang for people with who've got mental health difficulties, got problems, got issues. And so it makes sense that prisoners should have access to that. But Michael Murray was ringing the Samaritans and giving a code word, Red October, which nonsensical sort of thing, and trying to align himself with the INLA and to say that a bomb had been planted at the minister's home in May of 2021. That sparked a huge alert. There was a search in the home. There were no bombs found. And then the trial happened this year. He pleaded not guilty in spite of the fact that he admitted to it to Gardaí, and he also admitted it to us in an interview extensively, saying he was responsible for it. But he pleaded not guilty, lengthy trial, found guilty by a jury, which of course he would be. And now he is, he was handed another 2 years on top, so consecutive with what he's already serving. So he won't be out until 2036, I think, at the earliest. But Michael Murray obviously has to be looked at in relation to these recent threats because they follow the exact same MO. Now, that's not to say that the Minister for Justice isn't going to be threatened by somebody else. There is a connection to Cork here, for example. I think some of the phone calls have been traced in some way back to Cork. So whether there's an involvement of other individuals, that has to be looked at. But, look, is this a copycat? Is it Michael Murray himself? Is it someone working along with Michael Murray? All those questions need to be answered by the Gardaí. But I asked those questions of Michael Murray himself because Murray has been unusually accommodating in speaking with me for whatever reason. It's not that I've been sympathetic, But anyway,
You
Michael
can
Murray.
connect with people.
I
You
don't
can.
know.
No. Hear me out. You can. I connected with Dutchy Holland.
Mhm.
Right. I'm not saying he's on the level of Dutchy Holland, but you're a professional journalist. I'm a professional journalist, and you do connect with people, and he might just go, "Oh, I'll talk to Healy." There's nothing wrong with that. I know you're not saying
No.
that's just what happens.
I mean, I'm not here to refuse a story, but and as I'm sure Michael Murray knows, I have to put all of that into context. We're not just going to write a sympathetic article, but yeah, look, I mean, we gave him the time of day to explain himself, which we have done before. And Michael Murray, just to say, previously denied involvement in the original bomb threats, and then ultimately went on to tell me that he did it, and then went on trial saying he didn't do it. So he's been back and forth a few times. In relation to these bomb threats, I asked him, was he responsible for them? And he said that he vehemently denies any involvement, and he has no one assisting him in it either. And he went on to say that he has no issue with Helen McEntee. So that's what Michael Murray has said in relation to the recent threats.
Let me ask you this. Would you be a politician?
Absolutely not. No way. Never. No.
Because did you see the video of Eir Hishik, Leo Varadkar?
Right? It was horrendous.
He's out for a pint or he's out for a cup of coffee and he's done. He's no longer an office holder. And it was, people have a sense of entitlement that they can say what they want to anybody. So I don't know why anybody would be a politician.
No, I think now in the social media era, anyone can film anyone. And we're seeing that more and more with some of the protests that have been happening. And I just want to preface this by saying that I believe in the right to protest, and people have genuine concerns and should be able to gather and protest. But among that are a certain cohort of people who have taken to antagonizing the situation, I would say. And with that, they're using their mobile phone, and they're filming everyone and everything, and using that for views on social media that's now going largely unchecked, especially on Musk's X, where you can buy a blue tick and have a platform beyond anything that any journalist can have. And so what scared me about this Leo Varadkar incident is, you look, I mean, back in the day, some head case might maybe have filmed on their Blockyear or whatever, that kind of incident abusing a politician, and that would just go nowhere. But what's happened with this is someone has filmed this, shared it on social media. It's shared by people with these blue ticks, and there are thousands of people who are rallying behind them and supporting them in the homophobic, downright vitriol
Mm.
and abuse. And that's what scares me, not so much the person filming it. It's the thousands of people who are now maybe feel emboldened and are somewhat brainwashed by the same crap they're seeing on social media. That scares me.
Do you think that the people who generally put up the videos or confront people, do you think that they get validated by the number of people who like, and and
Mm.
that sort of, that gives them a will to keep on going? Oh, look at this, 53,000 people or whatever have liked this and said, whatever, you're a scumbag, Leo Varadkar. I'm going to keep going because it gives them validation. I think there's a bit of that.
It totally spurns them on, and again, this is what scares me. I think we're getting into the realms of actually people committing serious crimes here. You have homophobic abuse being given there, and that is disgusting. But we, off the back of that, then there's been a death threat made effectively against Paul Murphy, the TD. So there's someone spray painted the words
Mm.
"R.I.P. Paul Murphy" on wall outside his home. That's the realm that we're now entering, where people are perhaps feeling emboldened to downright threaten politicians. And what scares me is these people that are spurned on by likes and views, that they're going to take it to the next level.
Remember when Leo Varadkar had a cup of, it wasn't a latte, was it a milkshake or something thrown over him?
Yeah, yeah, I remember
People
that.
laughed
Yeah.
at that, right? People
Hmm.
laughed at that, right? People left and right laughed at that. People on the left laughed at it. I thought that was very serious. I
Hmm.
really did think it was very serious because uh, it's a slippery slope, right? And what's next? So,
What we're
with that
seeing
in
it.
mind, yeah. Do you think? I'm going to ask you a question. I think I know the answer. Do you think we're edging closer to a politician being attacked?
That's what I'm saying. I
Mm,
think is that's the next step here is that
mm,
someone is going to take it there. What scares me is that people will be supportive of that.
mm,
You even just see it with the homophobic abuse.
mm.
Um, People are saying he deserves it and he deserves worse. And I've combed through the comments. It doesn't take long to see somebody saying you should have. If I was there, I would have decked him or something like
Yeah.
that. So there's people. Whether they actually would do that in real life, I don't know. But there are people openly saying on social media now, en masse, that they would attack a politician if they were in that situation. So I think we're in a scary situation, and I hope that Gardaí are on top of it. But with these, again, people have the right to protest, but there is a particular air at the moment of tension and anger among a certain cohort of people, and I think we're in very dangerous territory.
I was just thinking when I asked you, would you be a politician? I'm sure there's a couple of politicians going, Jesus, you wouldn't be stupid enough to be a hack, would you? Because we get it. The grief we get as well. But I just, look, we're all big boys and big girls. That's grand. But I do think there's an air of hostility towards journalists. So
Hmm.
it could be that a journalist will be attacked first.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I mean, we've talked about covering these protests. I do think
Mm,
that they need to be covered, and they need to be done. The coverage needs to be balanced. It needs to be fair. But it's very difficult now when you see journalists who have attempted to go in, and before they even open their mouth,
mm.
they're encircled by people who've got camera phones in their face, shouting and screaming. real hatred and abuse that I think is misdirected, but the journalist is getting the brunt of it. So how can we go in and fairly cover these things when you're possibly going to get attacked?
Well, and you do, I mean, we call it a dynamic risk assessment, but you
Hmm.
have to sit there and go, right, what's going to happen to me if I go in there? Like,
Hmm.
Paul, you and I do door knocks,
Hmm.
that's no problem. It's our job. We're not wallflowers. But
Yeah.
would you put yourself, you have to sit there and go, would you put yourself in that situation from a safety perspective?
So anyway, Mick, on to other topics. You were at the policing authority last week.
Yeah, I travelled down to Limerick. So the Garda Commissioner, Drew Harris, attends a public meeting of the Policing Authority. I think it's every 2 months. And it's really great for him because there's 7 or 8 members of the Policing Authority at them, and they ask him anything. And we always get loads of stories about it. But something very serious came out about it, actually. So I actually, when I was listening to the Commissioner talking about it, I actually thought he sounded quite worried. And it was basically about child sex abuse. So the Policing Authority had done a report about the investigations of child sex abuse, and they were talking about that. So what he said was there's been a significant increase in child sex abuse material online. There's a thing called the National Center for the Exploited Children, or National Exploited Children Center in America, which deals with child rape, child abuse videos online and stuff. And last year there were 10,000 referrals from that to Gardaí. So
Wow.
American cops sent 10,000 notifications, and the commissioner said there's been a 300% increase. So I was talking to him afterwards, and he was saying that they're now coming across cases where children are being coerced, children in Ireland, Irish children, in their bedrooms while their parents are downstairs, are being coerced to take part in sex abuse online, right? But worse than that, or that is horrendous in its own right. But he also said that they're being coerced to bring siblings or friends into it. So you have 8 or 9 year old kids being made to sexually abuse other children for some scumbag on
Jeez.
video in America who then videos it and then sells it on. And this is
Yeah.
happening I actually said it to him afterwards. I said, Commissioner, you sound quite worried about this. And he was. This is happening in Ireland. And it was just, parents need to wake up about what their kids are doing online. And I just thought that was extremely troubling. That this, and I said, are you telling me that children are being forced to sexually abuse other children in Ireland or some pervert in America or China or wherever?
Mhm.
And it's been filmed. And then he said, yeah, that's exactly it. He said, and he said, this is a very, very serious situation.
The fact you have the commissioner talking about that openly, I suppose it shows you the gravity of the situation. But
But
that's
that,
maybe not something people are aware of that's going on.
no, yeah. And so there's Detective Chief Superintendent, I think it's Colin Noonan. Colin Noonan is the head of the Protective Services Bureau, which deals with this sort of thing. And he was talking about it, and he sounded worried as well. So
Mm.
it was just something that I wasn't really expecting, because PA authority meetings can be quite esoteric, I
Mm.
suppose.
Mm.
Suddenly it's about children being abused online in Ireland by other kids at the behest of some fucker online. I just find that really, 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 really troubling.
That's a sick world out there. No.
Can I talk on a slightly later point? Maybe we might finish with this. We'll just talk about one other incident that police and authority. Tour Buckethead me went down to Limerick, right? And I turned out to be the only journalist there. Have you ever been at a thing where you're the only journalist?
Oh yeah, no, and that's
It's
the pressure. The pressure's on you then.
fuck me. And I'll tell you what happened, right? So I was sitting down, right? Dum-de-dum-de-dum, taking notes. I was tweeting it to some good stuff, and I was looking around to see where's the hacks. I saw a TV camera, right? Okay, where's RT? RT weren't there. And I saw some people writing, and I go, yeah, they're the locals.
Mm.
I always like other people asking the questions, because there's always a press conference with the commissioner
Mm.
afterwards, right? So I looked around and said, no, Michael, they're from the police and authority. So basically, they came up to me afterwards and said, look, RT, you're here. The camera person from RT is here, but they have no journalist. So will you do the press conference with the commissioner, but will you do it for RTE, right? So I remember thinking,
Double
right?
jobbing.
Double jobbing. I remember thinking to myself, fuck. So I thought, okay. So I wrote down the questions, and I tell you what, it was nerve-wracking, right? I was interviewing the commissioner for us, but RT were filming it, right? So I had to write down the points in case I fucked up and forgot it. But the worst thing was there were about 6 or 7 people standing there looking at me, going, "Give it your best shot, Mick." So when I finished, I said, I don't think Paul Reynolds has anything to worry about, but it was extremely nerve wracking. The only other time something like that has happened to me was 1994, 95, when I was working in Belfast before the Shinners were cool. And I went to a press conference in a place called Conway Mill at the bottom of the falls in Belfast, and I was the only journalist there. And ever since then, I've always prepared myself because I walked in and I shot myself because you go, I have to ask the questions. So my advice to any young journalist is prepare for the worst, prepare for you being the only person there and you have to ask the questions.
Yeah, it thankfully doesn't happen too often because we don't go to many press conferences. I can recall working for the Irish Independent early in my career, and I think I was being tested, and I was sent to some farming event, and I was to ask the then Taoiseach Enda Kenny a question. I've never been more nervous in my life.
Yeah.
Like to this day, because I had an audience, so there was an audience of people there for the event,
Mm.
and I'm sitting there front row going, "Excuse me, Mr. Taoiseach," like I hadn't a clue what I was doing. So I'll never be a political reporter anyway. That's for sure.
You wouldn't want to be. But, it's no problem. Look, you and I can interview people. I've interviewed Tishy and everything, no problem, one
Hmm.
on one. But it was
Hmm.
just the whole, it just became pressurized because you're doing this for RTA, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
secondly, everybody was watching you. And I
Hmm.
was like, fuck me. And that's why I like, at pressers, let Reynolds ask the questions. That's what he's paid for.
He'll be
Fucking hell.
delighted to hear that
Well, yeah, yeah. I was talking
if he
about it
listens.
afterwards. He was laughing his head off. So anyway,
Right, well, we'll leave it there. Thanks as always to our listeners, and we'll be back to you next week.
thanks everybody. Talk
Thank
soon.
you.